Hey everybody, James Riley from Goliath Historical Fencing Academy. Welcome back to the channel. Today I've got an interesting one. This is a little bit out of step with the usual content that we produce on our channel, but in light of the firestorm that we created last week with our bloom fencing video, lots of really fun things have actually come out of that. But one of them was that I connected with Julian. Is that how you say your name? Actually, how do you say your whole name, or however you like to be?
You can say Julian. I'm fine with the English pronunciation. It would be Julian Ronneberger in
Oh,
German.
okay, awesome. Yeah, I'm just going to use the American pronunciation because.
Sure.
uh, but we connected. He's from the Spadone Project, and we got to chatting a little bit about all this stuff, but specifically historical training weapons and all of the work that he's been doing out there in Switzerland. And I thought, and basically, we started talking a little bit about it, and I was interested in um, seeing if I couldn't get my hands on some of his replicas because that's something that's really interesting to me. Like that's all I care about is, oh, you have an actual authentic replica. I want to play with it immediately and see how it feels. But then as we were talking about it, he just inundated me with knowledge and information of all the work that he was doing. And I was thinking it would be a waste to just have him text it to me over Facebook Messenger, and instead he could maybe share some of it online, and we could talk about it for people who watch the channel, and I can ask some of my questions, and then you know we could see if we can't get to the bottom of some of the things that are going on. But anyway, so Julian, tell us about you before we even talk about the Spadone Project or any of the research that you've been doing. You know, uh, who are you? Where are you from? And how did you get involved in we'll say historical fencing to start?
Uh, yeah. I'm Julian, as I said. I'm originally from Germany, from Bavaria. I moved to Switzerland when I was 12. I'm 36 now. I just obtained Swiss citizenship like 2 days ago.
Congrats.
And thanks. So now I'm both German and Swiss. Um, I was always interested in swords, like from a small kid on. My mom was an opera singer, so I got, and Richard Wagner especially, so I read all the opera libretti and the sagas to it, like Parsifal and so on. So swords very early. That stuck, um, extended to what we all did, sticks in the forest with friends, I guess. And I always wanted to do some fencing, but Olympic fencing I personally found boring. And when I was young and where I came from, it was a bit more elitist. It was not that easy to start actually. And then came to Switzerland, and I'm also building bows and doing archery. And due to that, I came in contact with the reenactment group, got a bit more into the living history side of things. And during my studies, then I studied also Latin philology at some point, and we did paleography. And in paleography, I was going into fencing books, which I then transcribed for myself mostly and was like, oh, let's try this out. And with a friend, started to interpret um, the fencing books. And that was 2014 or
Mhm.
13. And then I found clubs because then HEMA clubs existed. And here's a relatively big one in Zurich. Claudius at Codex. And at some point, I managed finally to join one of the trainings, fenced with a trainer, and they asked me if I could become a trainer there. And then I became a trainer. And so I'm doing this since officially 2017 or 18.
Okay.
Then I founded my own club in 2018 or 19 here in Lucerne. So I'm trainer in two clubs, one in Lucerne and one in Zurich.
Hmm.
Um, Studied history in the end, and now I'm working in a foundation as a yeah hoplologist, as a weapon expert.
Hmm.
Um, Big collection. That's where you sometimes get the pictures of, not only from that collection. If they're rusty, it's from that collection.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just before we move on to the Spadone project itself, I know several people from your neck of the woods. Jack Gassman would be a very close friend of mine. And I've met Jonas. He came he's I don't know how well you know Jonas, but he does lots of work with the types of things that we have here in Chicago. And so he was down there working with those guys, and he came up to train with me a few times. And he's coming this. We're having our invitational boot camp next year in April, and he'll be coming to visit. And I'll also meet another person from your neck of the woods, Leander. I haven't met him yet, but I don't know really the layout of Swiss HEMA. So how far are you from like all of those guys? And I think did Jack tell me right that he started with Art of Mars in Switzerland. Is that where Art of Mars was?
I don't know about Jack.
Okay.
I know his father.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
um, but with him, I never had really contact. Jonas, I do know, but not deep. He's in Bern,
Okay.
and I'm in Zurich. And also, I do not fence tournaments.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah.
So I like sparring and I fence all of the people, but I do not participate in that. And he is now on the line of getting, national team, blah blah blah.
Yeah. 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 So
And
it's a different.
yeah,
It's a divergence and um.
but was nice with him. Everything fine. And one of uh, the guys that also trains with us, which is Yannick, he trains a lot with Jonas, so we have some
Gotcha.
overlap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um. Okay. So then we have this Spadone project, and tell me how it was that you started, or that you decided it was something important to kind of pursue, and what the ambition of the project was.
Mm, So it was started by Niccolo Minozzi, who's still the power horse behind it, basically. And he started, I think, in 2017 when he started HEMA, and basically there was little knowledge about the big swords, the great swords, and he started to delve into it. And he's very thorough and precise with everything. So he planned to make a publication at some point. And I came in contact with him because of a Latin source, which I translated and because he asked on Facebook or something, and then it was like, the German sources, he doesn't speak German, would be another thing. So I just started dealing with the German sources of accounts of the swords and so on, and that got connected more and more. And now we are co-authoring the book, the publication that we plan. It's still focused on great swords. All the
Mhm.
other weapons you see is basically to generate a bit uh, yeah, audience,
Sure.
because it's very niche in the end. And yeah, now we are full on board both and go measure every time. And like he's coming in January, and we have 6 museums in a week
Yeah.
set up to measure great swords.
So I think that's a really interesting. I think that just on its face, it's a really interesting project. You're right to say that like it's probably it's a underserved or fertile ground, we might say, for research and discovery, um, because a lot of effort hasn't been put into it. And I think probably because of something you've already alluded to, which is the fact that people who are interested in competing in tournaments are going to be are most often going to be the engine of community involvement, right? And so their interest in weapons that it becomes less feasible to compete with safely, or we haven't come up with a you know an adequate training environment and fencing environment for those types of weapons. It just makes it difficult, and so we don't get those people to sort of push us in a direction of development.
At the same time, there's so many people love these swords from Warhammer and so on. Like there's a certain idea behind it, but actual knowledge is very little, or there are a lot of myths, and
Mm,
that was something that uh, harassed us to some point. So our goal is also to make some statements clear, and for that we have the sources, and yeah, it's gonna be big.
Yeah, I'm very excited about it. I've obviously, I'm like you know, I started my interest with swords began when I was very young. For a while, my Facebook post was a picture of me playing with Legos, maybe 4 years old, and I have a plastic sword in my. In fact, hold on, do I have it? No, it's in the other room. I have a plastic sword that the old like hollow silver sword in the gold scabbard.
I know which ones.
Yeah.
I also had one.
um, and so, but I, I've always been really interested in the two-handed swords, um, the Zweihander. I'm also in, through this practice, I got into Lance Connect and that type of thing. You see a lot of these in iconography, giant swords with the flamberge or the. Actually, maybe I'll pull it up here. The one that really just, I think maybe it was seeing this replica. Um, it was seeing the first images of this replica made by Arms and Armor, who's the um, they're the manufacturers, the firm that I'm kind of tangentially associated with. But let me show you a picture of it real quick. So maybe you might appreciate it, um, or maybe you'll
Or
have a
not.
lot of criticism. I'm interested in hearing your take on that. Let me see if I can pull it up here. Yeah. So this was a sword that Arms and Armor made as a custom piece for some people. This is going on a decade ago, but you can see here. You could see some of the intricate carving that they. Oh no! Come on, there it is. So you can see some of the carving that they did in the grip. Um, I just thought that was just magnificent, and uh, and so like that sword, I've wanted that sword since I saw that picture. Like what a magnificent uh, piece of art. But of course, I fence with a longsword, and this is when we get into talking about the fetters, we can talk a little bit more about this. But while those fetters are generally much bigger than the swords that we use in modern HEMA practice, or at least I think we're kind of trending in that direction. But when HEMA started, when I got involved in HEMA, the swords that we were using were slightly smaller than the ones that they're using now, and I would say substantially smaller than many of the historical examples that I've noticed out in the wild. Right, so I don't know how big the ones that you've recreated were, but the ones that I've seen, the blades are around 105 centimeters. That's like normally I think what is standard in modern HEMA fencing, probably something like 98 or 100 at the most. Like those would be the longer ones. 105 is quite long for modern HEMA practice, but it's pretty common in some of the historical examples that I've seen. But they're not as big as this, and I wouldn't have the first clue how to approach developing a fencing system or even a martial arts system with regards to the use of this weapon. And so like I'm curious to hear what your take is. I've sort of thought about it the way that it's been proposed by people like Roger Norling, that I would use that like a staff. So if I were to, I don't know, but anyway, I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are.
I mean, there's no general answer, first of all. And this example, of course, is style-wise leaning into some later German types with a bit deliberate art history,
Yeah.
which is of course fine. The point is that as this is a German type of sword, Schlachtschwert,
Mhm.
um, there are no dedicated sources that we are aware of.
Yeah.
We have mentionings, even in Joachim Meyer and in Andre Pauernfeind, who just says, everything I'm teaching you here about the longsword is valid for the Schlachtschwert. Now you can see when it's time-wise settled, and Power and Find is 1516. And this type of sword
Right.
is way later, so
Yeah.
70 years later. So there's a change already. You see a decline on the battlefield. They have certain um, jobs to do, but
Mhm.
are not universal anymore. And I'm honest here, these are the ones that Nicolo and I personally don't like. I can appreciate like the artistry and everything, but we are both pretty much into the ones up to the 1550s maybe, where they were also still much more deployed in battle formations up to that point. So of course nowadays most people just look at the Iberian sources,
Right.
which
Right.
are way later, and technically for the Montante, which is just a Spanish term, but they are different in style. Like they're more thrusty, they have thinner blades, not the big horns, different shaped LZT, so lugs.
Yeah.
So all different. But I think the most valiant advice is really just use it like a long sword in the first place. And only up from a certain size it becomes difficult, and you want to keep the momentum on and so on.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have some sources that give an idea, like people like Jan Gosewinkel and so on. They also look into the Dürer Fecht book, which is not by him, but the workshop.
Right. Right. Right.
um, like there are sometimes techniques or mentionings of techniques that you might want to go in that direction to apply. Otherwise, use the Italian or Iberian ones. They at
Right.
least deal with the big ones.
Yeah.
And using it like a pole arm, there are situations where even Italian sources speak about it and so on, but for the German ones, we don't have.
Sure. Okay, so now we'll get into really the impetus for this discussion, which was that we I've been working with Arms and Armor. I've actually been an employee in various ways with Arms and Armor for about 10 years, but mostly I just sell swords for them at the Renaissance Fair. So I'm probably responsible for propagating a lot of the mythology that you've had to try and debunk as people walk up to my booth and I I actually, I try and do my best to give them a scholarly account of what they're experiencing when they walk in. People come in all the time with varying levels of experience or understanding. Like, is that a blood groove? This is the blood groove. That still happens even today. And so, but you know, we were talking about the Arms and Armor has just released a new Fechtschwert. They call it the Fechtschwert training sword, and it's a replica, pretty faithful replica of the um, sword uh, that they have at the Met. Or they have a pair of these swords at the Met, and
Yes.
Arms and Armor took the measurements and did a lot of handling and really tried to do a good job with it. Have you communicated with Nathan?
Yes.
Are you guys
Like,
planning on doing anything together at some point?
not directly. They found two new Fechtschwerter in Germany in a museum, and the curator contacted me. So in the end, we will write an article for a very renowned German magazine, or that's the idea. And then we want to do like a scholarly corpus about the known Fechtschwert and everything. So we're collecting the data.
Mm-hmm.
And when I heard even before Nathan made these replicas, I knew before that he has seen them and spoken about them. That if I can have the data for the article, basically,
Yeah, sure, of
that we
course.
can provide as much as possible. And of course, I have told him about some properties of the ones that we looked at here in
Mm-hmm.
Switzerland. because I think the ones in Switzerland are technically the ones that were the most thoroughly looked at.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um,
Right. And those are the ones that Danielle brought.
Jacquet,
Did he
yeah.
bring them over here a couple of years ago for WMAW? Or I think he did.
As far as I know, he is in the US right now,
Okay. Well, this
like
is. Go ahead.
for a year or something. He got the replicas, like faithful replicas, 2.5 years ago.
Hmm.
But when he looked at them, that was 2014 or something, when he
Yeah.
first went to the Landesmuseum in Zurich and looked at them. And then he went to Regene and they made a replica and so on, but they're not faithful.
Hmm.
So I
Right.
don't know if he brought some Regene over there, or if it was in the last 2.5 years, it could have been
Sure. No,
the
I think
faithful ones.
it was farther back than that, but I think well, he certainly gave a presentation, and I was pretty astounded by some of the details that he shared, and that was one of the things that Nathan has talked about at great length in his discussion on the ones that he's been making. You know, um, these new arms and armor effectual swords. Um, they're very, very different than even many of the quote unquote replicas of these historical fetters that have been made, that are basically, you know, they're basically designed to try and be both things. They're designed to be historical um, Fechtschwert, or historical training sword, effectual sword, and then also something practical for modern HEMA, and that seems to be just not in the cards, I don't think. Um, but yeah, and handling it, I handled his Higgins one. He made one of the Higgins last year or 2 years ago, and I was able to play with it a little bit last year, and I thought that was very interesting. But then these new Metropolitan ones that blew me off my feet. I wasn't prepared for that at all. And in the video that we made, I get to fence with both of them, and I would even say that they're remarkably different from each other, and as much as both of them are very different from all of the regular fencing swords that I normally handle. Um, but then when you started sharing some of the knowledge uh, over text, I was even further taken aback, because you were able to reproduce some of the metallurgy, and particularly with regards to the way that you have it hardened. Um, that's all super, super fascinating to me. So I guess I would I would open by saying, like, how do you, and in its most superficial way, how would you characterize the difference between these swords, these historical swords, and what we're training with today?
The biggest difference is, besides the geometric shape of the blade, um, point of balances sometimes, or the forward pivot points, um, handle length compared to blade length. But mm, fair to say that there, of course, are historical Fechtschwert that are pretty similar to modern HEMA swords that try to imitate them. Like the Zurich ones, for example, have very long handles, two long blades, while, as far as I know, the one from the Met are way shorter.
That's Yeah, that was one of the things that really took me by surprise, because I've been interested in these sort of replicas for a long time, and I think uh there's the Elgar uh maker who makes a replica, and there was the VB uh Italian replica. You've seen all these, and I know that there are lots of ways that they're kind of not don't take it as far as it
Uh,
might need to go, but just in a general way, they're very big swords. They have, a lot of them have very big handles, and certainly very long blades.
yeah, of course, also to a custom like gloves or gauntlets.
Right.
Um, but yeah, most of the ones that we are aware of have shorter handles. But then it's also again the questioning what time they are from. Like if Fechtschule happens over several hundred years, and there was also a change. And also in a Fechtschule, you have different types of fencing. You have show fencing, You have the one where you fight for the highest wounds and so on. So there might be swords for different purposes in the Fechtschule that still kind of look like each other, but have different properties. Like if I want to show more off, or we are fencing in the Rosen or something on top of other swords or some stuff that needs to look different than when we are fighting for the bleeding head wound. That's also a reason why we, of course, look at all the different Fechtschwerter to see if they are for different things. And also in the article that I announced, we are working with another person of the HEMA world, Paul Becker in Germany, and he looked very thoroughly into nomenclature of the sword. And there are sometimes mentionings, and I can't open up about them now, where the name indicates maybe a different purpose even, or behavior of the blade and so on. So it's always the question what these swords were made for that we are looking at. The one in the Met and Higgins and so on are probably for the highest wound, as well as the Zurich ones, because the tip, the ort, is so thin that you can easily make a cut, or at least a visible wound, if it doesn't have to bleed. That's that. For the makers to try to replicate from pictures they saw or some basic data, one issue is that a lot of them have standardized steel sheets they work with, and the originals are thicker than the ones you normally get, so they would need to change production. That was one issue with Regine. They have like 6 mm sheets or something, and they can't go to 8 or 9 mm to replicate that.
That's a similar issue with the Higgins. That there, I think, the Met was a little bit easier to put into production because the stock was a quarter inch, and I think that maybe the Higgins was 5/16 or something like that. So like a similar thing, the production lines are optimized for sourcing materials of a certain dimensions, and it's going to be a challenge to kind of approach it in a different way.
And then besides safety factors and so on, the other thing is the time we want to use them, maybe, like how these were not made from homogeneous steel, or like back in the day, it's just some steel and differently hardened and so on. And now we have certain steels that you just harden through, and they hold up for the type of fencing, due to the fact that we are very much or mostly protected. The fencing maybe is also a bit more risky or more suicidal in some regards. So you might go more violent to each other than you would probably if you are not wearing anything. While of course we have the Fechtschule accounts where they are really going at each other, so it's not like nothing. And the other issue is, of course, while I said this in other videos before, that they kind of try to imitate these swords they have seen in Maya or something in depictions, but we are not fencing after Fechtschule rules normally. We're allowed to thrust, we can use the pommel and so on. We can go into grappling, which you're not allowed in a Fechtschule. It's all forbidden techniques. So it's a very specific type of weapon for a very specific type of fight, technically. And you need to be aware of that. But aside of that, I think if you wear a bit more protection, you can, like, I fence with these now for 2 years. I have the replicas, and with my 800 Newton jacket and stuff, like, I feel the thrust, but they bend differently and so on. So as long as you're protected, it's fine. But the feeling I have in the bind, and the whole concept of fühlen is so much more present due to the shape of the blade. They're biting more, you have more friction basically, because they are not rounded. In the end, it feels more like a sharp weapon without being a sharp weapon. And you don't get that with modern produced swords so far.
One of the other things that you go into the lack of the homogeneity of the hardening and of the steel itself. You know, when people ask me at Arms and Armor and when I'm selling swords at the booth, they say, "What's the steel?" And I give them it's an alloy steel that we use, a spring steel, 6150. And they say, "Well, is that historical?" And it's like, no, I mean, it's historical in as much as it's steel, but it's we just use foundry steel, like, because it's going to be much higher in quality than people ask, do you forge these? Like, no. You pay $10,000 for one of these swords, and it would be nice, but it's going to be of a less
Yeah,
durable quality than foundry
yeah,
steel that's hardened all the way through. Um, but that being said, it does change the characteristics, and you know, as you're describing the different ways, did you with the research that you guys did you actually um, check the chemical composition of the various steel throughout the?
this was so when Daniel Jacquet looked at them in 2014, he had done X-rays,
Mhm.
he had done hardening tests, he has done flex test, and the chemical composition. But there was an issue that he is not allowed or can't publish them or couldn't.
Okay.
And yeah, at some point we got into it, and originally we planned to write something together, and we were, but then he went to the US and stuff, and I basically didn't hear anything anymore from him. He vanished a bit. Um, but right before we finished with so he got 3 replicas from us that are like one-to-one replicas aside of the steel. The steel is not like historical one because nobody was funding this project.
Mhm.
um, but all the replicas are forged.
Okay.
Also the ones I'm fencing with, they are not made from just sheet steel or anything. They are forged, but with modern steel that from the elements here and composition um, wise is pretty close, and also behavior wise there, because you have case hardening or hardening through steel, more into that. And technically you would say from nowadays perspective, if you tell people that it's made of that steel, they say, what, this is shit steel.
Right.
But it actually captures the nature of the historical steel better.
Yeah.
And if you forge it well, of course it holds up. Like the best swords we have from the Middle Ages, if you look at the chemical composition, it's but they are there for 500 years. You can make a good sword with
Yeah.
bad steel as well.
Right.
But in that regard, we were lucky because we now know the hardness and the composition, so we could imitate that.
Hmm.
Issue is you can't fence with these with modern modern ones, so you always need a pair
Yeah.
at least, and as they are hand forged, it's not the cheapest. It's like ordering a sharp sword basically.
Yeah.
It goes in the same direction. Um, we did try to fight against modern ones, and the feeling was still better, like so much better. Like
Was it better for both fencers? So the fencer with the modern sword, was he able to feel? Uh,
no, no.
no.
Um, it sounds stupid, but with the historical, you just felt superior, like more balanced. You had more feeling, everything,
Hmm.
but the edge damage is there.
Yeah.
And that's what people normally don't want, especially when they're just going for fencing tournaments. They want the sword to hold up and
Hmm.
stuff, and it's not about fencing as historical as possible. So then we are back to the question, what is HEMA and what is not, and what's the goal? Um, but I can only recommend everybody to at least try it if possible.
Hmm.
And the smith who made it, who made the replicas, and is a close friend of mine. He just did um, he extended his school basically, so he wasn't working on them now for 1.5 or 2 years. And when he is finishing in summer, he said he might have a way to get the cost a bit down
Hmm.
because the cross guard, the pommel, and stuff. That is stuff that you can make modern. They're not hardened specially or something. You can just, but blades, you can basically not cheat
Right.
cheat on. And
So here,
then
as you
it might
keep
go.
talking, I'm going to pull up some of the images that we were talking
Yeah.
about here, so we can take a look. So what are we looking at here specifically?
These are the original ones, the three
Okay.
that are in the Swiss National Museum in Zurich, better said in
Sure.
the depot. Yes. And one is a pair,
Okay.
and I could track them down in the inventory of the armory. So they are mentioned coming into the armory just in the year 1703, but they were not ordered by the armory. Somebody private sold these in 1703 to the armory.
Hmm.
So they can be older. In the catalog that is very famous, this from the Swiss National Museum, they are dated to I think the last quarter of the 15th century. Probably not.
Yeah. Right.
But also pretty sure before the 18th century. So most of the ones that we have and that are datable, like the ones in the Met due to the maker, I think there we are in the 1580s or something. And they are type-wise going in that direction, just that the handles are longer. The third one, which has a way longer blade, but a shorter handle,
Mm-hmm.
the over length of that is 136, while the pair is 133
Mm-hmm.
approximately. Um, there, it's a different type, and that came later. I couldn't track that down, but I think I found the pair, which is in Canada in the Calgary Museum.
Wow.
Most of these were made in pairs. Like not everybody had a Fechtschwert at home or something. That is not how it normally works. You asked to. It's an event, right? It's not a place where you go.
Mm-hmm.
So the fencing masters went to city and
So
said, "I
these,
want to
yeah,
do it."
these would be held in the armory, the same armory that any of the
Yeah.
city
So
weapons would.
so even in historical terms, it seems like these were mostly made in pairs at least, and then brought to the Fechtschule, and then you fenced. And you see that you have two in the mat. That is a pair.
Mm-hmm.
You have these. That is a pair. In the collection I work, we have one, and I know where the second one is. The one that I mentioned but can't say where they are is a pair. I found the second Higgins one, um, but I still need this all for the article. I can't
Sure.
give all the information out. But we now have 5 or 6 historical pairs. At least it looks like it.
Mm-hmm.
And that, of course, so even if you think a bit further, if you say the club has 2 of them and you just borrow them and fence with them, that is more historical than everybody has his sword.
Mm.
Yeah, this is the replica below,
I
and
see.
above is the original. So yeah, this is one of the replicas.
The replica is the one below. Okay.
Yeah.
And,
The other ones have this ferrule, the original, and they
uh-huh.
don't have a wasted grip,
Mm-hmm.
which is just personal preference.
Sure. And then these are the edges, or the
Tips.
excuse me, the tips.
Yes, from the original and the second one, from the replica, and these are 1.2 millimeters, if I'm remembering correct.
Right. So the ones that so the one that Nathan, the one in the Met, I believe he
Yeah,
measured it to be point uh what did he say? It was 0.3 millimeters. And that was not something that they could really feasibly do, because they had to harden it, they had to through harden it, and then they had to grind it into that thickness. And so if we're in the 0.3 millimeter range, that's quite something. uh,
yeah,
and so he made his at zero point 0.5, and then the Higgins is slightly thicker than that.
yeah.
So there seems to be some variance, with regards to how sharp these tips were.
Yeah, it's also if I look at the one I just had in my hands, you see that at the tip itself it might be a bit thinner, but just around the rounded corner it has this 1.2 or something.
Oh, I see. Yeah, yeah.
Um, but yeah, it works quite well. I don't know how much influence the steel hardening has, but I always think it has to do with the bounciness of the steel.
That was my sense. The way that you were describing, and this is
Yeah,
something that I'm very interested in because um, we fence in a way. One of the I have a gripe. I'm not going to get on my hobby horse right now, but I tend to have a gripe with the way that we optimize, or the way that either rule sets or whatever our approach is optimizes lack of control. And I don't mean lack of control in um, how do I say it? I don't mean lack of control in terms of our actions. Like, it is true that generally speaking, our actions are more violent than they could be because we're wearing more protective gear, and so it's generally safe for me to behave in a way where I don't have to worry about arresting my motion. I don't have to worry about stopping my action because I know that whatever is in the way of my action, if you're well protected, should be safe for both of us. And so that is a constraint that we are experienced with the greater gear. But when I'm talking about control here, what I mean is controlling our training partner's blade, right? So making sure that we're adequately dealing with a training partner's blade before we perform offensive actions. Um, and so whether that be inside the motion of their blade, if we can catch an instance of motion, then we can work into openings that are being created. But generally, it seems that the sources are very clear that they're prioritizing controlling the opponent's blade in meaningful ways before you begin offensive sequences. And and in our game, the whatever modern HEMA manifests, we tend to optimize or prioritize um, actions that don't prioritize control, and that instead um, they prioritize more of the capturing the motion or moving to targets before opponent can get their sword in the way of it, right? So that's a very different framing of fencing, and it's totally valid. And certainly there's lots of uh, references to this type. It's half of the game. It's what I would call the weak part of the game, and any kind of fencing. I'm a student of the School of Janusichenauer, so I think of things as strong and weak. And the strong part of the game would be dominating the blade before or through your offensive sequence of actions, and the weak part of the game would be moving away from where they're putting their sword and kind of hitting in that space of time. I would call that the weak game. But our fencing in tournament seems to prioritize a very weak game, and I wonder if part of that has to do with the fact that if uh, if it's harder for me to stay bound or use the bind to control your sword because of how bouncy both of our swords are, because they're through hardened, and they're like, and they're rounded edges and all of the reasons where we have less friction, um, then as soon as I feel blade contact, it might be more optimal for me to flee that bind and move away from your sword, and move to uncovered openings rather than through poorly covered openings. Because that's really what we mean when we say strong, is not that, like, if your sword is in the way and I want to attack through it, it means that you haven't comported yourself in a way that can adequately resist me attacking through it, right? So like, that if I see people make parries that are just insufficiently structured parries, and then that is a cue to flee the bind. Whereas really it should be a cue to move through the bind and dominate the sword as you finishing offense. So anyway, all of that to say, I'm really interested in this whole idea of the softness of the steel. And you were saying that it's soft in different ways across the blade, right? So there's different types of hardening. So can you break that down a
yeah,
little bit?
yeah. So as I said, the old steel is case hardening basically, right? It hardens on the edges first and less in the middle, and that's also what we see if you read Alan Williams's the what was it, Blade in the Crucible or something. when you look even on sharp ones, what is hardened and what is not hardened, then the same here is that the thicker parts
Hmm.
are basically not hardened or very little. And it's not necessary. They stay like they are basically. They do not really deform much. There's enough structure behind it. Um, then in the middle, it gets harder. And the hardest it is in like the last, yeah, maybe fifth or something. I always say
Hmm.
you kind of would, you don't see it with the flex, of course, but from where it flexes, basically, if I had to segment it,
Right. Well, that would
it
make
is.
sense, right? Because if it was softer where it was flexing, then it probably would be more difficult for it to maintain its shape.
Yeah. Um, but yeah, that's it. And hard is far away from what we would call hard nowadays. Like
Hmm.
most people know, like, yeah, 50 Rockwell or something. We have the Vickers score of the originals, and they are very low, sometimes like 120 here or something, up to some spots might have something that if you convert it, but only in spots, go to 45 or 46, but the rest is like below 40 or at 40 or
Yeah.
something. And in the middle, it's like half, and here is not,
Yeah.
or very little. Or it's just the outer case, right? But not through. And it's not necessary if you think of it. Like with this, I'm gonna cut you in the end,
Hmm.
but I basically don't bind here or do anything. So I can have the thin part here. Most stuff happens in the middle
Hmm.
when we bind and so on, or if we go into the strong, then here. And this, of course, helps as well, as we have said, like not rounded edges, they tend to bite better. Like it's not really biting, but the friction is different, and that you feel. And when we fence, what we noticed compared to all the other swords that we used before, which were from Regine, Aureus, Sigi, Krieger, whatever, is that if you want to push the other blade away, your body needs to work way more. And the same if you parry, it's not enough to just and you get the impact into the sword and it does it. Like when people do a krumpau or something, they just use the rotation and that's kind of enough in most cases. It isn't.
Hmm.
Like it just sticks in the spot and then suddenly, ah, you're not fully covered yet. So you
Hmm.
go further out. This opens that side way more open. So where I personally notice is the most was in the um, besides the Krumpau, of course, in the Querhau and in the Schielhau.
Hmm.
Um, Basically, both swords stay where they connect. None gets just thrown out of the way, except you work with it.
Yeah.
And suddenly, stuff tended to work out more. Like, there were some techniques, and it's probably our fault that it doesn't work like it's described or not as proficient, and only if you train, but not in sparring.
Hmm.
And it seems to be, if of course the measure is wrong and so on, that also the sword is doing half the work. And if I don't get the full opening
Hmm.
that I need to create, and that suddenly happened.
Mm.
And besides, of course, you feel where the pressure goes, and therefore you can get rid of the bind, or you just know when you can mutieren and so on. Like you feel it way better; it's transported to you better.
Hmm.
But I don't know if it's also due to the shape, as said, because we have more friction. So it's probably not only hardness; it's everything together.
Yeah. And that's, one of the kind of, it gets us, it's a nice segue to the wrapping up the conversation. So like what Nathan is trying to do with his work is he's trying to get more of these fitters out. And I think he mentioned in the video that he made yesterday about the subject that we're going to be doing a workshop in March, I think, in SoCal, where we bring some of these swords out and we kind of play with them and talk about the use of them and encourage people to fence with them. But we can we can do our best to imitate a lot of this stuff. Nathan is going to be at least imitating the shape in a meaningful and faithful way. And so it'll be, the more people play with these, the more interesting our discovery will be. But I am very curious about how hardening forging the swords, case hardening the swords, and having a faithful representation, if not the chemical composition, at least the metallurgy, and how that changes. Like, I'm very, very interested to feeling what those feel like. So I'm just gonna have to fly out to you if they'll let me in.
But yeah, but yeah, the geometry alone does a lot. That is out of question. So that is already so much more than using most what people use. So it's already a good step, I think. And maybe in the end we need to do like different disciplines, who knows. Like, you fence with historical swords in a more historical way, with lives instead of points, and so on. And the others can keep going with their
Yeah, I mean, I actually spent my morning having this discussion about what actually is HEMA versus what do I do. I'm of the view that HEMA itself really is just the discourse around the direct engagement with the historical sources. That's it.
Yeah.
Full stop.
Same.
And so people there. I don't think that anyone deserves or can has the authority to claim a monopoly on authenticity.
Absolutely.
As far as HEMA goes, if you want to talk about swordsmanship, or you want to talk about what it means to be a student of a tradition, that can be a different conversation. But it's sort of in the nature of HEMA that we can't really know anything, that everyone gets to practice and figure it out themselves. And in the same way that historiography is about narratives, right? It's not, we can't know real things about the past. We can just kind of construct a narrative, or at least that's a perspective that is common.
Yeah, no, but and you see probably the same. Like, at least we have hints or glimpses, and stuff that supports each other from different places, still going on in the same direction and stuff. And there's a difference to ignore that completely, not seeing the context of it,
right?
And just saying I want to hit somebody with a sword, which is fair, absolutely. But
right. I think one of the ways that we've damaged ourselves as HEMA sort of enthusiasts or practitioners is that we have claimed a monopoly on authenticity. And so because we've claimed a monopoly on authenticity, we haven't really created a space for people who do just want to hit each other with medieval or Renaissance weapons, right? And so now they have to come in this space and they have to prostrate themselves and claim, like, oh, my master is Jonas Tischenauer, my master is Vadi. But really, they're just there to do swords in whatever capacity that they're interested in. And I think that's our fault, because we haven't created a space as a broader swordsmanship community for people who just want to kind of do a physical activity or engage with a broader community, or just live out their dream. That's sort of that's my take, and I'm not here to evangelize anyone into it, but I do think that approach is valid. And I think what we've done in HEMA is we've said, well, any sort of the use of these swords is HEMA, and then you're not doing it right because I say that HEMA looks like this.
Yeah.
And so we put ourselves in a hole in that way.
Yeah.
Okay, well, so listen, Julian, thank you so much. That was really fantastic. I guess the last thing I would say is, when are we going to get production line replicas of the Zurich swords?
As I said, it depends on the smith. And I think he earliest thinks about it in summer. So I will update anyway, and new stuff will come up, and I'll try to take the smith to the 2 unknown Fechtschwert as well. And we are also allowed to measure the flex of them. So that would be cool.
I think I remember Danielle was talking about the distal flex. So typically we don't get flex in the distal axis.
You put 100 grams on the tip, and the way it bends down, and then you calculate and so on. But that is not done in most of the museum objects. So it's cool that we are allowed to do this. So it gives a a better idea than just getting the shape or stuff. We know from
Yeah.
mathematics and physics how they bend at least, and that would be the second pair where we can do it.
Okay, so where can we look for updates? I know that you have a YouTube channel. I will link it in the description. Anywhere
Yeah,
else?
I mostly like the Fechtschwert are technically not part of the Spadone project, but as I'm in between, I'll still put it out there. So on the
So
Spadone project,
okay, awesome. Got it.
subscribe, support, Patreon, everything.
Yeah. Well, all right. Thank you so much, Julian. It was great to have you, and thanks, audience, if you
Thank
stuck
you.
with us for the whole thing. I look forward to hearing more. As soon as they become available, I'm gonna scrape my funds so I can purchase a pair. Apparently,
And if somebody is on holidays in Switzerland, like I always have an open hall in that regard. Like everybody can try them if they are there. So
yeah,
not an
I'm
issue.
sure. Yeah, I look forward to it. Take care, everybody.
Okay.